What's up, guys? Today we're going to be ranking the enemies of the UFC. So, enemy number one, down to people that are overrated with the hate on them. So, let's get right into it. Number one, we're going to go with Marab. He deserves some hate. I'm honestly a huge fan of Marab. Super active guy. And honestly, he doesn't have the finishes, but his style isn't terribly boring. Like the Umar fight, one of my favorite fights with him in that. He got a submission against Sean O'Malley. But again, then there are some times where he's up against the fence, just kneeing to the thigh. So, some hate definitely deserved, but I don't think he's anywhere near the terrorist of the sport or enemy number one, especially with some guys on this list. So I think that's right from Marab. Coming in next, we got everyone's boy, Bilal. So another guy, not terrible fighting style or anything like that, just doesn't have the finishes like Marab. Very pillow hand, but he did, get knocked out. Sean Brady standing up. He doesn't have any knockdowns, but still, everyone was so mad that he was gonna get a title shot. But then, like, they liked Leon, so at least Bilal. I mean, went in there, had a war with JDM. Really good fight there. So I think he definitely, he can deserve some hate, but not anywhere near some of the other guys, as we said. Coming in next, deserves all the hate. MVP. I mean, this guy, zero finishes in the UFC. Super boring. I mean, his last fight was Sam Patterson, dancing around at range. Literally had, I think, two significant strikes around. So boring to watch. And then, you have the commentators, Michael Bisping, glazing this guy, saying, oh, like, he could have changed that with any shot, changed the fight when he has zero finishes in the UFC. He knocked out a bunch of Bellator bums, and that's how he got all his hype. And now in the UFC, he does nothing. And I think he just deserves all the hate. Um, and hopefully he can actually get a knockout or something in the UFC and change what he's doing because right now it is so boring to watch him, and he definitely deserves all the hate. Coming in next, one of the terrorists of the sports, even though he's not in the UFC, he got cut for being one of the biggest terrorists of the sport, Jaden Almeida. Coming up, he had a bunch of finishes, and then his fight with Derek Lewis laid on him for 5 rounds. Absolute snooze fest. His last few fights, literally laying in half guard and, you know, throws zero strikes, does nothing. I mean, even Volkov was able to get the win against him laying on his back, just throwing elbows and patter punches from his back. And he got the win because Almeida did zero damage, just holds people, just an absolute terrorist of the sport. Coming in next, overrated hate. I've heard a lot of people that they hate Imavov and everything like that. I mean, I get some of the hate, for him sitting around waiting for a title shot. But when you look at his resume, I mean, he beat Israel Adesanya, who was only coming off that loss to Sean Strickland and DDP. Knocks him out in 2 rounds. Super exciting fighting style. He beat Kai Barallo after he was already, basically a number one contender. And I think he will be the next one to fight Sean Strickland. That should be a super entertaining fight. He's gotten a lot better since that first fight. And I just think he's super fun to watch, really fun fighting style, and should be a good fight. So I think some of his hate is pretty overrated. Coming in next, somebody that, deserves some hate, but is generally overrated when it comes to hate is Movsar Evloev. Same guy as the first two on this tier. Doesn't have any finishes, but he's honestly had some pretty exciting fights. The fight with Aljamain Sterling, one of the best grappling matches I've ever seen in the UFC. Super entertaining. With Arnold Allen, super entertaining, and with Diego Lopez, very entertaining as well. I think most of the hate I think should be him pulling out of fights and not being very active. He said he's going to be trying to be more active, and I hope so. Um, I don't know. The no finishes obviously is not a great thing, but it's still super entertaining fights, and I think he deserves some of that hate, especially for not being very consistent and active. Coming in next, another terrorist of the sport, Cyril Gane. Eye pokes, sits around waiting for title shots, and then does nothing in the title shots or eye pokes. So, definitely another one of the terrorists of the sports. Hoping Alex Pereira knocks him out. I think everybody's hoping for that. He beats up a fat guy once a year in France, and then plays 2K the rest of the year. So definitely one of the top hated guys in the UFC. And then coming in, we got Kai Barallo, another guy that, you know, I don't really think has that great of a resume and, not a very super entertaining fighting style. I mean, his fight with RDR is kind of boring. He just clinches, throws knees to the legs, only has like one finish in the UFC. And then you have Joe Rogan and all the guys who just glaze the fighting nerds, telling him he should fight for the title, just glazing his fighting style when, Imavov schooled him. And I just think he deserves all the hate. I don't know. I just really don't like this guy. I hope he gets shinned in his next fight. Hopefully Joe Pyfer, turns the body cam off or something. We'll see. Coming in, we got Aljamain Sterling in the overrated hate. Now that he's up at featherweight, I feel like he's just, been way more entertaining, especially, that he doesn't have to go through that massive weight cut down to 135. It's not really his fault that he won the belt from DQ and then, had some other really close fights in bantamweight for the title against Henry Cejudo. Um, but at 145, his last fight, super entertaining. I mean, the way he just scrambles, his fight with Movsar, super entertaining as well. And I think a lot of his hate is old from him, winning the belt on DQ or anything like that. But, his once he gets your back, like super entertaining. And him, I think he's definitely got overrated hate. Another guy in that tier, I would say, is Big Ank. Most of the hate now from him is because, he beat Alex Pereira in that first fight. But, looking at it, he doesn't have a super wrestling heavy style as some of the other like Russian fighters. And, his fights have been pretty entertaining. And, the fight with Alex Pereira, obviously, there were some circumstances. Alex said he was injured or sick or anything like that. Nobody ever knows. But, it's primarily standing up. He's more of a kickboxer compared to some of these guys. Knocked out Johnny Walker, not has some other good knockouts. So overall, I think most of his hate is overrated as well. Coming in, another guy who deserves all the hate, Amir Albazi. I've never liked this guy ever since his robbery against Kai Kara France. That's his only ranked win in the UFC, and somehow he's still ranked number 7. The next two guys he fought, Brandon Moreno and Horiguchi, schooled him. Wasn't even fair. And I just don't get how, he's ranked number 8 with 3 unranked wins in the UFC. And I think he was just getting pushed unfairly. I don't know how one of the worst robberies I've ever seen. Robberies thrown around a lot in the UFC right now, but honestly, it was probably the worst robbery I've ever seen, and most people agree with that. So I think he deserves all the hate, even though he's had some, other health issues or anything. Not hating on that. Obviously, that's terrible, but just strictly in the UFC and in the sport, I'd say he deserves all the hate. Coming in, somebody who deserves some hate, we got Islam in there, only because obviously his fight with JDM laid on him for 5 rounds, 0 damage. But, look at his fights in lightweight, a lot of finishes, a lot of good fights. His fight with Volk is one of the best ever. But, took 0 damage in that JDM fight and just doesn't turn around right away. Fights once a year. A lot of people hate on Ilya for that, but when Ilya knew that he couldn't fight, right away with his ongoing legal issues, and they made an interim belt where Islam, he says he's injured, says he's not, said he's ready to go, and just wants to fight once a year. So I think he deserves some of that hate from that, but I would think his next few fights, most likely against Ian Gary or somebody like that, should be, very entertaining. I don't think he'll be able to, just sit in half guard against a guy like Ian Gary. But I think he deserves some of that hate for the inactivity, especially when he takes zero damage in his fights. Honestly, just because he's that good. Coming up, another guy that deserves all the hate, Leon. I mean, he's super boring. I mean, he has the one KO against Usman, obviously one of the craziest KOs of all time. But you look at that, got wobbled by Nate Diaz and has barely any other finishes in the UFC. People were loving that he was going to be champion, and then some of the most boring fights, that fight against Colby, insanely boring. People were picking him against Bilal because they were scared Bilal was going to be boring when he's had way more entertaining fights than Leon Edwards. Should have been a striking battle against Carlos Prates, and then he just jumped on his back for the whole first round and proceeded to get finished. So I think he definitely deserves all the hate. Someone who deserves all the hate, or some of the hate as well, Hamzat, basically for the same reason as Islam, takes zero damage against DDP and then just does not turn around. Part of that, I think, is the massive weight cuts. We saw that affect him against Sean Strickland. And honestly, I hope he goes up to light heavyweight where hopefully the weight cut won't be as drastic and he should be able to fight, more than once a year, same as Islam. So we'll see. But coming in next, another guy that definitely deserves some of the hate, not as much, I think, is Mario Bautista. I would say before his Vinicius Oliveira fight, I would put him even higher on this list. But that was that was a super entertaining fight. Great performance from him. His Jose Aldo fight, all those other fights definitely bring him down. But I think he's honestly doesn't deserve as much hate as he could have. He dropped Umar, and then Umar made that fight super boring. But, overall, I don't think he should be up as high on the list, especially after that performance. And if he gets another, super entertaining, good performance and a finish in his next fight, I think a lot of people will agree and, start laying off on some of the hate. Coming in, another terrorist of the sport, Ian Machado, Gary. Everybody knows him as one of those guys. And I just remember him coming in, being a huge, knockout guy. Everyone was scared of his power. And now, goes to boring decision every single fight. He went to Brazil and now he's, a Dagestani wrestler, lays on MVP the entire fight, has like 20 strikes. His fight against Bilal, not a great, good win, very boring as well. And, honestly, though, I'm excited for him against Islam. Should be a pretty entertaining fight with, Ian Gary, who's not very entertaining. But I think when somebody as good as Islam's against him, he's really going to have to switch it up. And there should be some good grappling exchanges. And with his size and length, hopefully he uses that to his advantage and, puts on a good performance. But, his last couple fights have just been snooze fest. Obviously, he's whining and everything, saying, he took Shavkat's soul, everything like that, So I'd say he's definitely one of the terrorists of the sports. Coming in at number one, the number one enemy of the UFC, we have Yair Rodriguez. Don't know where this guy is. Somehow he's ranked like number 3 in featherweight. His only win's Patricio Pitbull since he beat Josh Emmett for the interim belt. The UFC obviously pushed this guy so hard. Had a custom interim belt. Headlined every Mexican event. Refuses to fight people. Fights, we don't know where this guy is right now. He lost to Brian Ortega. Literally has beat Patricio Pitbull and says that he wants a title fight. Just sitting around doing nothing, and I just don't think anybody, I don't know a single fan of this guy that this guy has. So I'd say he's enemy number one. So this here is the list of the enemies in the UFC. Let me know what you guys think, who you guys hate, who do you think the hate is overrated, and we'll see you guys in the next video.